That's the point that people are gonna look at you crazy when you say, that's African people that were the slaves.
In their own home.
It can't be both though, bro.
No,
No, you gotta understand.
You're not understanding what I'm saying.
She said they're not
To
enslaved the
get
same
the
way.
black people, the black
Listen,
people.
Africans in Africa were definitely
Black
oppressed under the
people-
rule of colonialism.
Okay.
Let's more clarity on the beat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the African Millennials.
Yeah.
We have a new cast member. She's going to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aisha, and I look forward to having fun with you guys.
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Topic time. So we're going to have my brother Jonathan read the topic today.
I got you. Y'all ready?
Yeah.
All right. Dear AMs, should we stop talking or complaining about racism and slavery? Other races were enslaved too, so should we forgive and move on?
Nah.
That's heavy.
Nah.
That
is a good one.
Let's start it off with the ladies right now. What do we feel about this question?
You say no?
I say hella no.
Why?
Well, because for starters, slavery just ended a few years, centuries ago. And there's still a lot of effects left over in society from that we're still healing from. For example, racism is still very prevalent. I mean, look at who our president is. Mm-hmm. Any human being can understand that this man is just being a complete bigot with most of his policies. Mm-hmm. So it's an issue, not just for blacks, but for all people of color. So racism itself, we cannot let go of. Yeah. And then slavery, we can't let go of because of slavery, we have certain systems right now that are still oppressing people who are black specifically.
Yeah.
So this is my thing. I definitely don't think that we should forgive or forget. I think move on is a little harsh. It's almost, what Kanye said, even though he was very much so misunderstood with his delivery when he said that, we were enslaved for 400 years and slavery was a choice. That obviously wasn't what he meant. I feel like what he meant was we were mentally enslaved.
In the mind.
You are up on numbers, like triple, the masters. And the fact that we were our ancestors were mentally enslaved, and they didn't feel like they had it in them.
Practices and things that they did
exactly.
to do that.
So my thing with that is,
I disagree with
I
that.
feel like today we need to focus more on black privilege. I feel like we're always talking about white privilege. We have black privilege too.
But Jonathan, how can you do
Okay,
that
time out.
without like
What
an
is black
apology?
privilege?
What is black privilege?
How can you
our
move
culture,
on?
our style, what everybody else wants, our hair, our look, our skin color, our melanin. That is black privilege. And I feel like we focus too much on the negatives. I feel like we have black privilege and we don't express that or show attention to that enough. I always talk about we need to know the power that we have. We need to know basically we need to understand that we run stuff. We run everything in the world, whether it's clothing line, food, music, style, culture. Everybody wants a part of that black culture. And I feel like that's black privilege.
No, we need an apology.
All right,
we
hold on.
need
For what?
we need an apology.
Hold on.
No,
First of all,
we need it because without a no. Because right now people don't accept what happened and where the wrong went. Like until we get to that point of like people really acknowledging like what really went down, and every party, the Africans who sold acknowledge that you sold, the buyers acknowledge that you bought. Like everybody has their part to play, and we're not gonna move on to even appreciate that black privilege until we accept and acknowledge. Right now, the narrative is nothing happened. Oh yes, slavery.
Well, I'm gonna disagree with both of y'all because there is acknowledgement that slavery happened. No one thinks it didn't happen. Like there's evidence. You're saying that it wasn't acknowledged. Like that's no offense. I've never heard of that ever being the backing because it's literally proof of evidence that it happened. I'm not done. Now with you, Brad, when you say the word privilege, that's giving it that it's a right or it's lorded over. No, our culture is appropriated. Other people get to dabble in being black without actually being black. That's not a privilege for black folks because we can't turn it on and off. Privilege means you could turn it on and off. The reason why we make a point about white privilege because you can exercise that privilege at a given point. You can do that. There is no time where a black man or a black person in America can turn on a sort of superpower that gives them an advantage being black over other Americans.
Not sure where he got that there was a black privilege. Privilege is something I believe that you can exercise. I don't think there's anything that black people can exercise, but there tends to be a use of our culture and things that we make popular that are used to monetize. I don't think that we've done a great job of unifying anything particularly all black that is 100% foolproof and monetized. It's always an outsourcing in the way that our culture gets used to, even if we come up, it all has to be approval of another group. It's always something that's manipulating the market, but I don't think it's something that we all feel like we have access to.
Now, to your point about Kanye, that first of all, the fact that you said you agree with Kanye,
I didn't say that I agree.
I
said that what he meant.
You tried to sympathize with the idea. That's first of all, that's blasphemous, and you need to rethink a lot of things that you just said. The reason why blacks can't forgive or forget, the country doesn't give us the credit. The first, like when they comparing slavery between other groups, like those groups were enslaved for a very short amount of time. First of all, the real reason why a lot of Europeans stopped being enslaved was because it was so easy that when one of them escaped, that you couldn't tell the difference of what they looked like. That's part of history and why they broke off to Native Americans and black and Africans, because there was a distinct difference. When another Anglo-Saxon or an Irish man, if they broke apart from their camp, if they stood against and lined themselves up with 10 other white Anglo-Saxon people, it's easy for them to manipulate their traits to look and blend in. So it was hard to keep track of it. That's one why they dabbed into to Africa. The problem is me being a crew member in the crew tribe of Liberia. My people actually prided themselves on the escape of slavery. They're one of the few tribes in Africa that were never enslaved because they either killed their captors or they killed themselves. A lot of them never made it to America through a slave ship. So that's the problem right there. There's an idea that every single African or West African person was enslaved. There was a lot of people who didn't come over here through slavery. There was a lot of mutinies, but the highlight of it is because the original currency of America was slavery.
Black enslavement is essentially how the country was built. It was built through human capitalism, and it's still prevalent today when you think about the prison system. So I think that it cuts deep because it's an ongoing thing, and there hasn't been a situation where you can say that nothing wasn't built off of slavery. Like this entire country, the economy, it's always constantly going. And with the system that we currently have in place, it's almost as if it's a joke to even say that it ever stopped.
I think honestly, the thing is, it's not about complaining, but it needs to be a thing where I think we should get rid of the notion that we need to get over it. We need to focus on doing this. We need to focus on doing that. I can understand where you're coming from with that, but we're in a system right now that we are discriminated against because of what we look like. No matter what we do, people say, oh, all you have to do is work hard. All you have to do is do this and do that, and you'll be. It's not that easy.
We still haven't gotten the social reparations.
There's so many things that we're fighting against. And while it is okay to focus on being a better person, the racism is always going to be there. Right. As long as hate exists in the world, as long as there's a superior attitude in the world, racism will always exist. We have to figure out on Not even us ourselves. The people that are being racist, they need to understand that we're here to stay.
Right.
We are here to stay,
and
as long as we have that hope within us, as long as we have that grind in us, we're not going anywhere. And we can never forget about what happened to us.
And when you say, and the thing about it is those other groups that were enslaved and then they weren't, you got to think about, it was like almost as if the European whites, they had to take a step back, debriefing in order to take a break from slavery. It wasn't like they ended slavery and it was over. They needed a chance to slowly get over the fact that we can't enslave them. Mm-hmm. It's been a progression. So it's like, first of all, we talk about slavery. Yeah, slavery was 400 years ago. But the Jim Crow laws and segregation, that wasn't that long ago. There's people that are alive that lived through that. Like, there's people that are
and
sitting...
the civil rights movement.
What about colonialism?
So what's the difference between black people and Jews?
They got an apology and they got reparated. And they got reparated.
Any reparations that were paid out for the cost of slavery was given to the slave owners. So even in that regard, black people were disregarded as not important in their own struggle. And when you make the point about Kanye West saying that slavery was a choice, you know, that's more speaking to his own self-hatred. Or his own insecurities as an African American, and I think he shows that in even more ways through his actions. You can't discount what African Americans had to do in this country to survive. It is because
I want y'all to understand that. I'm not saying that slavery was a choice.
It is because they made the choice to survive that they have their descendants who are living today. If Kanye West's ancestors did not make the choice to bow down to their oppressors in a way, he would not be where he is today. And you can't discount the people who did choose to rise up and rebel and create mutinies, riots. You don't hear about the Maroons who lived in the mountains and escaped
was
slavery.
like speaking to the point that like, as time has gone on, it's become more of a mental thing.
It. But it's when police shoot down,
the point of being mentally enslaved. However, that was what was done to survive. You cannot discount or disregard what the choices they made.
But what about
to
today?
Live.
Today we have so much power, though, and I feel like we're not using that.
Today we are using it. You don't see all these movements we have now.
I think it's a total disregard. Even the words that Kanye put out there, it's a total disregard for saying basically slavery was a choice. And, you know, we speak on the present day, but to know the present, to know how to move forward in the future is to also know your history. You have to know what happened before. You know, there's a reason there's an Old Testament and a New Testament in the Bible, because it's just the mistakes of before and what's going to happen next and how to fix those mistakes. So we can't negate what happened in our culture, and we can't look at each other as if, well, you know what, it was 400 years ago, it's 2019, new year, new me. No, it doesn't work like that. So at the end of the day, look, I personally believe, I like Kanye as an artist. I have nothing against him, his music, but I just believe it was distasteful words, and he should backtrack on what he said. You know,
because I think what a lot of people don't understand and why they say, oh, get over slavery or get over racism. After slavery happened, there was no one teaching black people how to read and write after slavery, especially because it was illegal. Slaves couldn't read, slaves couldn't write. So how could they vote? How can they impact the country if they can't do that? And they knew, the people in power, the white people that were in power, they knew this. So they put these different laws, these Jim Crow laws into effect that lasted up until, what, the 70s?
Right.
Yeah.
Almost. And that's what, 40 years ago?
But I'm saying with the
we can't forget about these
I'm going to try to give them even a broader, because you're still skipping a good chunk.
I just wanted to make sure they understood some of that stuff.
So there's a lot of things that they can't do. So now you keep going through the industrial period, you keep going through different wars. There's still a divide in the country. What they then do from there is they now provide a system where, okay, we're going to segregate. We're going to establish segregation and Jim Crow laws. During this time, which is a very important time, black people this is when there was a black privilege and a black power. We've gone backwards because with segregation, blacks had to be in communities where they provided everything. There was black-owned banks, black-owned gas stations, grocery stores, farms, doctors, everything. Everything was self-sufficient to black people. That's why some black extremists believe that we actually took a major step backwards in integration. Because then when it was integrated, a lot of people had to sell those businesses because they had to submit to the greater power of the country and the country's businesses. And when you do that now, when you take it to 2019, everyone's like, oh, support black businesses, support this. Well, it's not that simple just to go black, because in some of the most black people in the world, in America, probably live in the South, right? In the Southeast. You can go there and you still can't even go live a day-to-day life where you only support black things. Right. You can't do it. When they gave reparations to the Jewish people, look about, I know it was, they called it ignorance on LeBron James' part, but he didn't feel like it was ignorant, neither did 21 Savage. Why? To say someone got that Jewish money is like, we weren't saying it to be he wasn't saying it to be derogatory. It's like, when I'm coming up, I watch Jewish people, in my neighborhood, go door to door and buy real estate straight up. Like, oh, do you want this house? And they're buying it and they're keeping their company. And their little son is growing up and he's overtaking an apartment complex. I don't see too many black people being able to do that. So the fact that still there's not a pipeline of a lot of black people who can say they're doing well for themselves. There's issue. Every other group in America.
But don't you think it's because white people or the colonizers per se haven't really acknowledged their wrongdoing or said anything? I think back to Amazi's point, in South Africa, there was the Truth and Reconciliation Council, and that was a huge factor in the South African population being able to move forward and on from the apartheid. When you look at America, there hasn't been any sort of man, sorry about that, here's what happened, this is what I did. And after Nelson Mandela was elected president in 1994 in South Africa, we had something that was called the Truth and Reconciliation Council. And I believe that council was a huge factor in the progressive nature that is in existence in South Africa today. We are known as the Rainbow Nation because we have come together and united. But that didn't happen until our oppressors said, hey, I'm sorry. This is what I did. Let me tell you, how I am remorseful about it and how I want to unite and how I want to be a part of this human race with you. Without that Truth and Reconciliation Council, I believe that there would still be strife in South Africa. We would still be in a hateful society. Without that apology, it's hard to move on from the soul. Make it process.
I don't think. What does
there's an African saying that says, before you can move forward, you have to acknowledge the wrong that you've done.
I'm acknowledging. If I was white, I'm acknowledging for my ancestors who
refuses to acknowledge. The British people have refused to acknowledge that they colonized the entire world. The French people have,
and they're not. So what is that going to do?
It's in the books.
But if you look at the history book, how many books in the U.S. they say, oh, the white people came and they say they shook hands with the Indians and the Indians gave them the land. The history books have literally erased what has happened in Kenya. When I was learning about colonialism, they say that when I was younger, they say that, oh, colonialism was good for us because white people brought modernity and Christianity. What sort of nonsense is that? There's no acknowledgement for the wrong that was done so that we can really start healing. Right now, we're just putting bandages. We're putting bandages over a wound that is oozing out pus.
So you just want them to put that in history books? Is that them acknowledging?
Or a public apology?
No, because in my exams, when I was writing my exams, they would have to say, what are the benefits of colonialism? There were no benefits of colonialism. How is that a question in an exam? That is a problem. We need to acknowledge that
it is so sad that the colonial masters don't even see the destruction that they did, that they feel that I, as a Kenyan student writing my national exam for the British Society of Education, Cambridge, a question on that exam is name some of the benefits of French colonial rule in Africa. There is no benefit to somebody coming off a foreign land, coming to my land and telling me from now on your religion, your practices, the way you look is against my God, it's against everything, and you have to be who I am. There is no benefit in that. You're acting like we did not have our whole lives together, like we were uncultured. No, we were far more head thinking than you think. Who taught you how to shower and clean yourselves? The Moors, when they did their journey across the world. Where do you think you came from? You came from Africa. Come on, if anything, you should be trying to be like everything that happened.
I think you're saying it's less about acknowledgement and more about action. And at least action.
But if you acknowledge, the action is going to follow.
Yeah, I feel like, especially in our generation,
there needs to be action taken. You know what I'm saying? Because you mentioned the history books. You mentioned, like you said, you mentioned trying to get reparations and everything like that.
That's an action.
It's an action. We can't still sit here and say, oh, I'm sorry, we disrespected your people. Oh, well, move on.
Right.
I'm sorry,
because
but no, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that.
What are the actions that you feel need to be taken?
So basically, I believe that it's less about acknowledgement and more about action. And it plays on both sides, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that are still ignorant to the fact. We have generations upon generations of black people who don't acknowledge their sons and daughters on who they are and where they come from. And we have white people who also don't educate their sons and daughter about history and hey, listen, if you go outside and you interact with a black person, you can't say these things. You can't say the N-word. Right. You can't do these things. It's not being educated. And, so it plays both a role. We both need to have the action put into our school systems to educate. While we're learning our ABCs, we need ABCs. The curriculum. We need, certain things with brands and media, socialist views on things. We need to educate our children coming up, because adults can lay in their ignorance. You know what I mean? You can be racist. You can be racist in a little town in Arkansas and no one knows. But if you have sons and daughters who can go out into the world and populate and can make an influence, then we need to put that in the still. When I said that actions, Mazi was saying, listen, I understand where she's coming from when she mentions an acknowledgement. But to me personally, at this point, it's a little, better late than never. We need street action. And I was a little bit strong on when I said, writing a check. But it's a step in the right direction. Not only do we need, the money provided, but we need certain policies in place, certain policies being closed and, certain policies being shut down in order for us to, win and take a step in the right direction. But at this point, I just think that we just need to start reaping those benefits that other races and people have reaped from their, cultures being destroyed and, and just lashed out upon, within society, such as the Jewish and the Native American cultures. So I just believe it's our time now, and we've waited long enough. So no sorry is gonna mend that, and I'm just not having it.
I get from that, a lot of it is we have that power to do that. We are teaching our kids too.
But it's not about us teaching.
So what, you just want the white man to teach them and then we're okay with it? Is that what you're saying?
This is there's a couple points to be made within what he's saying. Right. One of the main things I always say, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I don't see color. That's right. When people say that, I'll almost want to just walk out of whatever you're saying, because to say that you don't see color is the dumbest thing in the world. Everyone has differences. It's about respecting those differences and respecting where people come from. So when I forget the lady's name. She had a class that she taught.
I know who you're talking about.
She made a video.
Older lady.
Older lady. She does a lot of public speaking. She asked a big auditorium at a university. She said, everyone that's white, I want you to raise your hand. This is a big auditorium class, like 1,000 kids. She said if this country is so equal opportunist and everyone has an equal right into his life, right now, I want everyone to keep their hand up if you would be willing to switch your places with a black person.
Nobody
raised their hand. Right. That right there in 2017, I believe. Yeah. For that to happen right there shows that you can't just get over it because everyone knows that the system is broken.
Right.
Reparations has to come from it's a long line. Like there was a joke.
Yeah, that's I was just about to ask that because the whole Chappelle thing really like
he hit on a lot of things with that.
And I feel like that's why I asked, how do we regulate reparations?
So before I answer that, so Dave Chappelle made a skit about it was the day where all black people got reparations for slavery. They basically, in the idea of the skit, which actually could work, they were able to basically go through every black person's lineage and figure out based on the 40 acres and a mule, all that stuff, what it all amounted to down to the bloodline of the youngest person. And they gave actual monetary compensation for it. So it was a bunch of black people just wilding, like they was in the streets like, oh yeah, look, everybody. It was like I was rich. Like, they had like a white reporter coming. He was like, so what are you gonna do with your reparations? She was like, oh snap, there's broke people in here. Everybody get away. So it's like what they could do is. There's a lot of people who got their land taken from them because of whatever reason. More than likely, if you were to give reparations with monetary value, the people in the South would probably eat something crazy. Because some of them had their land, some of their land was taken not even legally. It was just taken because they didn't know what they were supposed to do with the paper. There's some black people that have stories of how they have a deed for a piece of land and they literally were told like, no. Like it's not yours.
What would we do for the Africans?
The African
like
continent,
us?
yeah.
So those it would have, like I said, it would just depend.
No, but we face colonialism, and again, the labor that was taken out of the continent to the Americas impacted the continent in terms of moving it from the agrarian revolution into the industrial revolution.
So what I would say is this
how have we never been enslaved when colonizers enslaving?
You're
coming to my country and you're taking my land, you're taking my women, we're making kids. That's enslaved.
There was slavery in the East African, Madagascar, Seychelles. There was slavery that happened on the East African coast, Madagascar, Seychelles, Zanzibar.
The fact that Jarrell said that Africans were never enslaved, just because you were colonized doesn't mean that that's not enslavement. When you have Europeans coming to your land, your home, and taking your wives, taking your kids, building and putting their culture into your home, your land, that's enslavement. You're working for them. You don't want to, but that's the only way you can live. That's slave. That's enslavement.
In terms of America, which is where we're getting at, it would be completely different. West Africans would be more likely to identify with any type of reparations because we were the direct coast. It was closer for us. Right. Like for Liberia, they literally that was a sneak form of reparations. As soon as slavery was over, they said, well, if you guys don't want to be here, we'll take you back to Africa. That's how Liberia was started. That's why we have the same flag as America. It's red, white, and blue with one star. It's the first republic of Africa because they said, everyone here, if you guys don't want to be here, we can give you a ride back over there. So they gave them a one-way. That's what they did. It was like, we'll give you a ride back over there. They gave you a one-way ticket, and that's how Liberia was started. But they didn't do anything else after that. What they did was they took some Americans over there. They said, this is how we run things. Everything in Liberia is under the same cloud and same guidance of America. We have a president. We have the branches of government. Everything is run the same, but we were never funded and never compensated. So in order to do
Liberia is a nation that should be part of the remuneration?
It was found like if you do like
and Africa as a whole.
Yeah, what about the Africans?
To directly answer your question, for a country like sorry to say, you probably didn't get jacked. But
there you go. So why would I just continue to talk about that?
No, you know why it doesn't have a problem? Because we actually talked about this before.
Because you're assuming that Eritreans didn't face oppression from the Italians.
When we're talking about
colonialism is really just slavery with a suit on. That's what that was. Yes, Africans did not suffer the cost of having no education.
What did you say?
Coming from broken families.
Rewind.
I said colonialism is slavery with a suit on.
Okay, and then what did you say after that? You said
after
Africans.
That, okay, we have African countries are basically existing as the banks for Europe. What we have in our countries is what was funding Europe and everything that was built in that continent.
Okay.
That continent. And the African people themselves were not enslaved in the same exact way that African Americans here were.
That's the point that I'm saying.
That's the point that I was making.
I'm only cutting you off because that's the point that people are going to look at you crazy and say, that's African people that were the slaves.
In their own home.
It can't be both though, bro.
No,
Listen.
You gotta understand.
You're not understanding what I'm saying.
She said they're not
To
enslaved
get
the
the
same way.
black people, the black
Listen,
people.
Africans in Africa were definitely
Black
oppressed under the
people-
rule of colonialism.
Okay, when you say African people weren't
Okay, go
enslaved,
ahead. Yeah.
Europe, to get black people to America.
Okay, we understand history.
We
Black
understand
people were
Africans
taken-
and African Americans are essentially
You're
the
speaking on the
same. We
reparation
understand
part.
we all come from the same place, but there was a separation.
I agree with her.
Yeah.
Like,
my thing.
No, but
You
you
look,
guys,
look.
what do you know about colonialism? What do you know about the colonial policies for you to
I
really
mean,
to
what
talk
was
about
Black
that?
Panther
Do you know
about?
about
What
do you know about
was the
detention
schism
camps?
between,
No, but do you understand about the detention camps that happened? No, y'all are speaking about
Slavery
facts.
and what we're
No,
talking
but
about is
I
about
completely-
slavery,
I
not the.
completely
We're not
understand.
worried about
The
it.
experiences are
I
different.
completely understand where you're coming from, but she said that the Africans on the continent did not have their
Experience the
families
same
taken
sort of
away in the
enslavement
same way.
that
What about the
African Americans
detention
did.
camps? What about they did? What about all the wars that happened? What about the Mau Mau
That's
War? When
okay, hold on.
what are you
Let me
talking
speak on
about?
this.
What are
This
you
is an
talking
American
about?
issue. I'm gonna speak on this.
Right
Hold
now,
on,
I
hold
don't like this argument about who was oppressed more and who was oppressed less. I don't like
She's not saying. I understand what you're saying, the point that you're making, but in this topic, we're talking about slavery. So, in talking about slavery and white people trying to accept it in America, we're not talking about the colonialism of those countries not affected. We're literally, in a way, unfortunately, only talking about really West
So
Africa.
why is it called African Millennials if we're not talking
The
about
topic,
like?
don't ask me, ask the person who asked the question. It's about, and when we're talking about
Essentially,
slavery,
forget about slavery, racism, but all of those things tie into each
all
other.
ties in.
Because slavery made way for
That's what I want to
colonialism.
know.
Like,
What can we do to
you're
move forward?
offended because in your country there was a different level of the colonialism. It was on that side. What we're talking about in this topic is about America.
Why can't we talk about that too, though? Why can't we talk
because
about
that's not what was
Okay,
asked.
but we still
racism is
talk
still
about stuff
faced
that's not asked too.
everywhere. Yeah.
Hey, listen. As an African American, look, I understand what everyone is saying, that their specific country and where they're from, and how does that all tie into the reparations? That is a valid argument. The question is, though, in America, you know what I mean? We all have, if we all take out our driver's license or birth certificates, I mean, most of us weren't probably born here, but we live here. So at the end of the day, we have to speak on what's affecting us here. In New York, in New Jersey,
why
where
are
we
you
live.
causing separation between
I'm not causing a separation. What I'm
Don't
saying
do
is
that.
we
I
have to
made that
stick to
mistake last
I'm
season.
trying to stick to the topic because it's a broad topic that we can talk about for years, but sticking to what we're saying about reparations. How can we fix this in America? How us
So you're
as
saying
African
Africans
millennials
are left out of that
No, you're trying to
equation?
put words in my mouth. Don't do
I
that.
believe reparations should begin here in America with African Americans. My personal belief in that is because that, most of the people who have went through this traumatic experience or have lost family members or have, been descendants upon descendants that have went through these things are from the South. I have family that is from the South. So it's like, somewhere in that genealogy pool, somewhere in that in the ancestral pool, someone has went through some experience, whether it been through a Jim Crow era or straight slavery era, where things were pretty much black and white, and it needs to start here in America. I understand making our way out into other countries and to the continent of Africa that can very well help. But at the same time, we can't just disregard us as African Americans and just, okay, we're gonna skip over them and then go straight to Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, and I have multiple love and respect for any of those countries. We're all in this thing together, and I believe we can achieve that together. But the first things first, we got to touch us first.
His point is the valid point of why there's a divide between Africans and African Americans, because the slave mentality is for the black, the original Africans who have been buried into the slave trade, and most of their heritage is linked directly over here. They have more than 4-5 generations buried in America.
Me, who doesn't have
right.
it.
Even though your originals in Africa, if you go back 4 people, they're still in America.
Correct.
which is why the slave mentality doesn't really get pressed on to people of like direct African descent. That's why when your mom and them, you know how they be like, oh, those American children, because you relate to the mentality
and it
different.
Is different.
So when I'm saying when you talk about slavery and reparations, that's what I'm saying. Those people in America, the black people in America who were directly linked through 3, 4, 5 generations. Those are going to get the first one.
So here's my thing.
But everybody reparates everybody different. America, reparate Americans. British, reparate your British colonies. France, reparate your French colonies. Everybody.
Finish that point, to be honest with you. Like he said, African Americans and people of other African countries, you know, the reparations can start with us. However, someone coming from Liberia, someone coming from Ghana, if they move to the U.S., that's when those reparations can start for those people. That's what I disagree.
I'm an educational Liberia. We would actually be in almost the same realm as the black people because we were the first ones sent over. We were the literal first slaves sent over.
You made a point in the beginning that if the reparations came in, people down south would get the bulk of it, and the reason that happens is because in America, the major economy was because of slavery.
Right, correct. Human capitalism.
That's what I'm saying. So when we talk about reparations, as Africans, some of us here are first generation, some of us here are second. That's not our struggle. Right. I'm sorry. Like it may sound crazy.
Thank you, my brother.
And that's what she was basically trying. That is not our struggle.
I feel like Africans, opposed to African Americans, they see slavery in two different lights. African Americans here, their great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers were most likely slaves. A first-generation African, their parents and their grandparents weren't slaves, so that experience is going to be completely different. So some Africans won't see the point in them bringing up slavery when it comes to getting over it. They'll be like, why is it something that's still bothering you? Why is it something that you're still bringing up if you know it happened so long ago? But they never had to go through that. They never went through. They don't have family that went through that. So that's why I said that, you know, it's different.
Struggle. We didn't have to worry about that.
We pay the cost in other ways.
Right.
Most definitely, but
It's just acknowledgement of it. It's acknowledgement. There's a reason.
You know why I disagree with you? Because if you look at the state of the African continent today.
But that's
no. Hold on. I haven't spoken. I completely understand what you're saying. Different Western factions have different atrocities that affected different black and brown people directly. You understand? In the Caribbean islands, Dominican Republic, they're facing their battles with the Spanish. Haiti's facing their battles with the French. Kenya is facing their battles with the British. But for you to just sit here and say that
me, right?
This team or whatever, for you to just say that the African continent should just be X'd out on this this whole dialogue, because what you're not understanding is that yes, the U.S. went through it. I'm not gonna ever take away from that. But the African continent still up to this day. Look at the DRC.
We're not.
Look at all
arguing with you. We get that.
Whenever we think of Black people and their oppression, I want us to think of the white supremacy as an institution on a global scale, so that we can fully understand its might and mass, even here in the United States. If we cannot understand that white supremacy literally cuts across all boards of life and touches on every brown and Black person in this world, then we really will not be able to understand what we're going against in our own personal country, in our own personal experiences and our own individual countries. That's where I was coming from. I was trying to really expand that language, that I completely understand the plight of Black people here. You know, I completely understand the plight of Black people in South Africa. Completely understand the plight of Black people in Belgium, you know, in France, in all these other nations that have majority white people, except South Africa, but, you know, that have huge populations of white people in comparison to their Black citizens. However, at the end of the day, for us to truly understand how this machine works, because at the end of the day, it works the same way across the board. It's just twisted a little bit to fit the individual countries. So for us to really understand how it's been twisted, we have to put ourselves on a global scale to understand that this slavery was, rebranded and put in a suit, as Aisha said, and became colonialism. But before slavery, what happened? The Arabs were there doing their own internal slavery on the African continent. If we want to really understand its roots and how we can move forward, we have to take it as far back as 100 AD, 300 AD, when the Arabs really started doing this on the continent.
When we're talking about reparations, we're talking about what the colonizers did to Black Americans here. We're talking about what they did. We're talking about slavery here. We're not saying that, colonialism isn't an issue. That is an issue on its own, but we're talking about...
you can identify to the slave
mentality. And that's what we're saying here in America with the reparations. We have to think about the people that were taken from Africa, brought here, and assimilated to the culture that was here. Hold on.
Can we move past it?
The thing is, that's what the reparation conversation is.
That's the way for us to move past it.
We need to understand that with Africans, like first generation people that weren't affected by that slavery, they're not gonna get those reparations because they were not slaves. Their grandfathers weren't slaves in America. So that reparation won't trickle down to them. I'm sorry.
Well, for me,
you
are this Liberia. We are Liberia.
Man, this is Liberia.
We are tired.
We got to put some respect on Harriet Tubman's name. We got to put some respect on
It didn't say
Frederick
America,
Douglass.
y'all. It said, should we stop complaining about racism and slavery? Other
racism here?
So should we forgive and move on? Racism is faced across the world. There's a reason why the U.S. feels imperialistic to go into brown and black countries and enforce certain laws. Like that mindset, it just doesn't affect Americans here.
Don't you start locally first? Where do you live? You're going to start over where? You're going to start someplace
I live both in Kenya and the U.S. That's why I'm still going to fight for my people in Kenya. I'm still going to champion their voices. At the end of the day, I acknowledge that there are black people here, there are brown people here. As you say, when I walk out on the streets, if a police or KKK, I'm a black girl. They don't care if I'm black from Kenya or whatever. I'm 100%, I agree with that. But at the same time, as a Kenyan, my passport carries, like when I leave this country with my passport, I feel the effects of that racism on a global and international scale. Same. Your passport is American. Okay, when you leave out there, you can go to Europe for whatever you're saying, I want you to just understand that the plight of black people is not in America alone.
We have to really open up our minds and understand that there's such a thing as American privilege. My Kenyan passport will never have the same weight as your American passport. Whether you're black, white, yellow, green, it's the same thing. When you go, you can go to Europe for 30 days on no visa, but for me to even step foot in Europe, I have to show them bank accounts for 10 years, all sorts of crazy manner of things. Where does that come from? That racist perception. Why is it that certain countries cannot access certain countries in the same way other countries? It's the same thing that's happening here. Why can certain people not access certain things in the society? Because it's the same system. That's all I was talking about. We just need to expand our minds so that we really understand this evil and how it works.
We face the same oppression. No, but you said that because you said when I was trying to broaden
we said it's different.
When I was trying to broaden the topic, you told me that it mentioned here, but I'm just reading. I read it doesn't say America.
Okay, that's a technicality that you're trying to. Let me ask you a question.
Okay, cool. If you would have asked 100 people on the street, let's talk about slavery. They're not talking about the slavery over there. They're talking about.
Why not? I'm trying to extend that dialogue.
For example, slavery started in this little island that you guys may have heard of. It's called Hispaniola. That's where I come from.
It didn't start there, but
that's where the first ships landed.
Okay, if you would, now
we going into it.
Can you not for a second? Sorry. Can you not for a second? Anyhow.
Go ahead, Queen. Finish.
Listen.
Española.
Hispaniola, right?
There we go.
So, well, we know it as Quisqueya because Quisqueya is what the natives called it. That's modern day Dominican Republic.
Right. Okay.
Slavery also has its parts there. And the anti-blackness that's happening in my country there is crazy. Till today, it's still very prevalent. So racism, we can't just keep it just in America because it's very prevalent against blacks in other countries too. That the diaspora is so broad that we should be talking about each and how we globally can get over it. Because it's not saying, like she said, the question is not saying simply racism in America.
But for me,
Dominicans who may come across this show and may be wondering, why is there a Dominican girl there? A lot of them don't know this part of their history and deny their blackness. And I think it's very important for people of different parts of the diaspora to speak up about their realities and their truths, so like that people can know that, hey, it's not only happening in South America, it's also happening in these small islands in the Caribbean. It's also happening all over the world, even in Europe. There are a lot of people who are of African descent who are suffering through this one thing called anti-Blackism and racism and erasure. There's a whole erasure. People don't know that Latinos are black.
For me first, but now we're getting into the Afro-Latina part. For me first, like we're getting into other issues that really don't solve the reparations. We have to look at people who actually...
Do you think the reparations...
But why you acting like people in Dominican Republic did not pick cotton, did not do sugarcane, did not... No, that's what you're doing by saying, I want to focus on the people who pick. That's what you just started saying.
Where do you live?
I live here and I live in Kenya. I live in both countries. So I'm going to fight for both countries.
Hold on. I think the problem is we are trying to. There's a lot of oppression. There's a lot of oppression Olympics going on, and I understand. Hey, we went through this. But we went through this.
My struggle was harder than yours.
Yeah, and I think. Let me land. And I think the problem is, I think what we need to do is we definitely need to acknowledge that there has been slavery going on where you're from.
Facts.
There has been colonialism where you're going from.
Facts.
There
I
has
think
been.
Never said that it wasn't.
No, I know, and I think the problem is, like, I think we need to start, like you said, we need to start listening to understand instead of listening to respond.
And also,
Because a lot of points, right? And I think as black people as a whole, there's a lot of damage that has been done.
That's the problem.
There's a
Across
lot,
the
and there's a lot,
diaspora,
right?
yes.
There's a lot of healing that needs to be done, and discussions like this definitely need to be had because there's some people that have a lot of superiority complexes.
What do you mean about a superior complex?
So I'm gonna go into it a little bit. I'm not gonna rant, but there's a lot of Africans that have this mentality that they're better than African Americans.
Facts.
And
Facts.
I'm gonna be honest. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it.
Facts.
There's a superiority complex that comes in, and I think that's a problem at times. Is it their fault? Sometimes I can't blame them. Sometimes I can, because when we came here, a lot of our parents, they came here and they saw how African Americans treated them, and it was bad. And it's like, yo, we're all the same people. Why are you treating?
Superiority
No, but as
thing,
we
though.
have advanced,
I think it's different.
as we have
Like
advanced,
she was
as Africans have
explaining.
come here and become business owners and have become very educated, there's
They
a
have to separate
pedestal,
themselves.
right? There's a pedestal that they put themselves on, and they look down on certain African Americans, like, oh, you people, you rely on welfare, you rely on this, you don't pick yourself up, and that's a problem. And that's
when a lot of Africans come here, they're ridiculed by African Americans. Some of them have been assaulted. Some of them just, see a lot of African Americans as lazy and, looking for handouts. It's a generalization. It's wrong. You shouldn't stereotype all of them like that. But the harsh reality is that's what happens. That's the view that, a lot of Africans have towards African Americans. Africans come here from, wherever country they come from, and they go get their education. They work hard, they get their certifications, they get their, degrees, and they advance in life. When they get to that certain point, they get to that certain pedestal, they feel like, well, we're here and the African Americans are here because they're still worried about government assistance. They're still worried about welfare. And, like I said, I don't think it's an attitude, Africans should have. It's not a good one. Superiority isn't something that, we should be, it's not an attitude we should have.
I just wanted to say, and why I'm trying to challenge that is because so often not that when we talk about this topic, we just limit it here. And I understand like how I understand your points, but what I'm trying to say is challenges to broaden that, because the reality is we have to really put ourselves on a global space for us to really mindset, because to really understand the connections, to really understand that the Dominican Republic led way to the U.S. in terms of like the ship stopping there. Whatever practices that happened there helped the white people perfect colonialism. The Herero genocide was the brainstorm of the Holocaust when the Germans was the imprint. So what I'm trying to say is I want you to challenge yourself to just think
I think that's beautiful and very idealistic. And in some ways, we are already doing that. We acknowledge each other's struggles. Even with social media, that makes the world smaller. So when something happens in Brazil, we know about it here in America. When something happens in DR, we know about it here in America. In that way, the world has become smaller, and we are aware of each other's struggles.
I don't want an apology. What is an apology going to do? I don't want no damn apology. What the hell is an apology going to do? Seriously. And I feel like that's our problem. We're sitting down waiting for an apology. Where are we going to get it from? I don't want it from Trump. I don't want it from Larry King. I don't want it from any white man. At this point, an apology would be insulting. So I feel like we need to take what we have. We need to take, like I said, the power that we have and push forward, make the opportunities for ourselves. You got people like Jay-Z and Diddy putting together an app that promotes black businesses. We need more people to do that. We have, like I said, black billionaires giving money to HBCUs. We need more of that. We need to stick together and move forward instead of just sitting down and waiting for a damn apology. From who?
No, listen, Jonathan, we're not saying that the apology is going to be permission to stop moving forward. We're saying that in order to heal the soul on that level,
I think
an apology is more symbolic
because my family wasn't enslaved here, so I don't have that soul to be healed, right?
I think the apology is more symbolic than it is, an actual.
So
I'm sorry.
What's a symbolic apology?
I think that's what we would have to define as African Americans, as Dominicans, as Brazilians, wherever we are in the world. We have to define what that apology is. Is that reparations in forms of money? Is that reparations in terms of policy change?
It doesn't also just have to be that. It can just be like,
what do we want? I think that's something
it can just be, I'm sorry, just saying something.
But hold up, you're making her point in that she's saying there has to be hold up.
I'm proposing that we all want an apology, but they're saying they want something more practical.
It takes more than that.
And we're saying,
some people want words, some people want money.
An apology at this point is disrespectful. It's a brush over. It's sarcastic. It opens
the door for lawsuits.
African Americans.
Hold on. Can I speak? It opens the door for what you're trying to say. If you apologize, okay, you can speak. I'm sorry.
Can I speak? An apology at this point is very like what does it do? African Americans for the longest have been disregarded. You tried to drive home your point. You mentioned Marcus Garvey, you mentioned Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and then you went home with the Kenyan point, and I'm like, that's part of the problem because you only choose to identify yourself. We always regarded you guys. African Americans have been disregarded, but on a larger scale, hold on. On a larger scale, we're speaking on the African diaspora. It's very like. You have Latinos, you have myself, African American, a Kenyan. You have so many people on the spectrum. So it's like at the end of the day, we have to choose where we want to be. Are we gonna play up this European thing and we're gonna say, oh, I'm Dominican, but I'm not black? Or where are we at? Because in African Americans here, we try to represent what we went through here: slavery, cotton, having to get whipped for reading books. But we can't do the same when it comes to all of us. Like, you have to pick a side.
To be honest.
Yeah, it's an insult. I mean, look, listen, at the end of the day, I made the analogy that if someone does you wrong 10 years ago, 2009, and they decide to pop up, March 2019 and say, hey, man, what I did to you 10 years ago, my bad. it doesn't work like that. You know, I might even laugh because at that point it's hurt behind that laughter, but I might even say, wow, like you have the balls or you have the audacity to apologize for something that you've done 10 years ago. You're 9 years too late. You're 8 years too late, 7 years too late. You know, with this case, it's even more of a severity. It's, hundreds of years upon years too late. How many black leaders have died fighting for what's right, saying the very words I'm saying right here? How many people had to ride a bus and no AC and, how many people have to go through getting killed and getting mistreated and traumatic experiences for us to realize or for them to realize to say, hey, listen, we need to show these people a modicum of respect.
To be honest, I really think that, like he said, the apology is not going to do anything because imagine, hold on. Imagine waking up tomorrow and CNN comes on and
a grand apology to black people.
Hey, black people, we're sorry for slavery. We're sorry for what happened. What's going to happen, and please let me land. What's going to happen is there's going to be a whole bunch of memes on social media. People are going to make jokes. People are going to go in the shade room. People are going to go on Twitter, and there's going to be jokes. What really needs to happen? I need to finish. Please let me finish. I need us to understand that what needs to happen, we need to make sure that for black people, let's make sure the prison system is not as corrupt as it is. Let's make sure that the education system is good for black people as well. Let's make sure that low income neighborhoods that are going through all types of struggles like crime, like poverty, let's make sure that they have the same chance that the white person on Fifth Avenue does. So I feel like when we think of apology, we think of just sorry. We need to, I feel like, and it's been said before, it's actions that need to be taken. We need to make sure that we need to make sure that the black community itself, we need to do some healing with each other as well. African Americans and Africans, because whether we like it or not, we are all the same people. We go outside on the street, we get stopped by the police, like she said. They're not saying, oh, well, this might be a Kenyan. I'm not going to stop because he's Kenyan. Like, we need to make sure that healing needs to be done. If I see you on the street, yo, you're black, I'm black. We're going to support each other and we're going to love each other.
Well, for me, I think reparations should come in forms of, policy changes. And I think Africans and African Americans should definitely benefit from these policy changes because whether we like it or not, when we step out into the street, when we get pulled over, we are seen as black, period. When we get into, certain situations, if you apply for a job, you're black, period. So I feel like reparations should come in the form of, change policy, the school systems, in terms of mass incarceration. Things need to be changed. The playing field has to be leveled. If somebody commits a crime, if we are killed, a black man is killed and he's unarmed, nobody goes to jail. For the most part, nobody goes to jail. That needs to change. Things like that needs to change.
After these things have been taken on, or can we just heal?
It's gradual. Progress is a process.
Are we taking those actions to actually heal? We're just complaining about it.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, I acknowledge your story, you acknowledge my story. I acknowledge your story, then we can, that's what I'm really just trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. And when I say an apology, I completely agree with, and I'm 100% with you, but I feel that if you verbally articulate those words in any way, you open doors for lawsuits. You open doors for policy change. Like, we can now finally not finally, because we do have the blueprint, but it's very easy to say, all right, you say you did wrong, this is how you can do right.
I don't need that. Here's my thing. When someone does me wrong, yes, I want an apology.
It helps you, doesn't it?
If someone has done me wrong for 10 years, and then they come and say, yo, I'm sorry, bro. Nah, that right there is
so then you better.
Correct. You can keep that apology.
So then
Where were you at 10, 12 years ago? Where were you at when I needed it? Now you've done me wrong.
That's not really healing. That's not really moving positive.
But at the same time, healing is on
write that check. Let me get this money. When your daughter's like, oh, I just want my check and I don't care. I don't want an apology. It just sounds really bitter. It sounds like you actually really need an apology more than anything. When someone does you wrong, it's human nature for you to want that person to admit they're wrong and to be remorseful for it. And that's something that just hasn't happened in America. And you can tell. You can tell walking down the street that people have not made amends in their hearts. And that's where change can really start from.
The greatest sorry and what everybody want is, if we're gonna be integrated in this, is seamless acceptance integration. That's the real reparation. That's what I'm trying to say. It can be money, because money makes people forget about things.
Racism is still gonna happen.
Right. If we're gonna be an integrated society, it's about the seamless. It's about the seamless integration and acceptance. Every group wants to be accepted. Like, think about one of the newest push-up groups that push through right now. It's the LGBT community, right? Right now, their biggest thing is there's a fight for, their acknowledgement on certain things, and they feel like they get disrespected on certain things. Like, most recently, like comedy. So I'm trying to give like a tie-in. It's about the acceptance. A part of being acceptance is being able to accept the things that happen to other groups, which is where there's like the conflict. With black people, I think the problem is when you say, like he keeps saying, well, I'm African, I'm not gonna get anything. When we do that, what we do is, people don't realize black people have identity issues. When everyone comes from other countries, they can say, my history is this, my history is that, my history is that. So even if we were just to cut them a check, they would still not be accepted as a unified front. Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X, they weren't trying to get integrated. Pan-Africanism is to unite black people as one against Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were on two separate sides of the spectrum. Right. So it depends on what you want.
So how's that? Towards the end, around 1965, that's the time period I'm talking about.
I was named after Malcolm X. Like my dad forced everything that he was trying to stand for and put into my mind. The thing about Martin Luther King Jr. Philosophy works if this is how we're going to operate in America. If we're going to be integrated, then we have to take the Martin approach, because Martin wanted everyone to be on equal footing. If we want to take the Malcolm X approach, that's more radical, and that's a separation.
So I think the greatest apology that could happen is seamless integration and acceptance. I think that's the problem right now. Like, as much as reparations will help, like Jared alluded to, all money can do, just throwing money at a problem, it just masks it. Because at some point, some people will probably take care of the money and fix it later, but somebody's gonna blow it and be right back at square one. So in order to prevent that, the biggest thing now is just acceptance. I think if it's a world where everyone truly believes that a black person, a white person, everyone is coming up with the same equal opportunity without the same passing the judgment, that'll be the greatest form of apology. Because that's really the problem. Everyone feels like it's just not fair.
Since we're on the topic of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, one of the last things Martin Luther King did say before he was killed was, I fear I've begun to integrate my people into a burning house. Yeah. So when we ask the question, should black people get over slavery and stop complaining about it? Yeah. If a man who died in 1968 could say something like that, and we stand here today in 2019 and we're still facing some of those same issues, I think it's safe to say that we're not complaining. We're still fighting for those same rights in certain ways.
There has been
when you look at here in New York City alone, you cannot go to any school you want. You still cannot go to any school you want to go to. We are still fighting police brutality. There are white men in this country in suits who can kill a black man and get away with it and not face any repercussion at all whatsoever. Absolutely. We have a president in the country right now who is an open bigot and racist. And that's reminiscent of what? The 1960s. So in a lot of ways, things have not changed whatsoever. So when we ask the question, what are we complaining about? It's not us complaining, it's us still fighting for those same rights. Are issues that have still trickled over into society today. When it comes to police brutality, when it comes to the quality of education, when it comes to ensuring that black people have the basic civil rights, for example, to be able to go vote freely, those are still issues that we're dealing with today. And unfortunately, we don't have the unity that we had back then to make sure that we are able to push forward these agendas, to make sure that we are completely and entirely free and able to participate in American society that everyone else has gotten to before us.
Also, like, it's hard to believe, but there are places in America that minorities have never touched. Like that they have a population where there's one out of the 10.
I understand that, and that's why there's 50, a fear there, because they don't know what to expect from us. Right. Because media tells them one thing, and I understand that. And my friend, my best friend, the older sister here, she understood that as well, and she made the point to me that us as a family were trying to change his mind about that.
Right.
So
Right. I think it's education. Like me personally, like my family, like is very like if you see my family, you'll think I'm adopted. A lot of people are like, are you? You know, so, like there's been some, you know, like other races and mixing involved in there. Like obviously I'm mixed, but at the same time, like, you know, my sister, brown like Prince, you know, my mother, you know, her complexion, like you, look, my mother taught us though, look, you all the same, you know, you all got to treat each other the same. You guys are brother and sister. Right. This is how this works. It starts in the home. I'm not saying that it can be perfect and you want to go out to school and experience certain things of races, but you have to drive home a point at the end of the day, when food gets on the table, when you hang your jacket up, when you put your coat up on the hanger and you say, hey, listen, this is the way I'm going to run my family. This is the way that I'm going to instill values and principles into my kids so that when they get older, they'll remember, just like he said, his old coach, he was in a certain mind state. I'm pretty sure his children know that as well. Right. You know what I'm saying? You have to know your history. So it's like, with that being said, certain people don't go past 1985 with music. They just think music started, you know, they don't know anything about blues and how things were taken. You have to be taught things. You have to. And that's where the mistake goes.
The reach isn't like you know, it's the reach of minorities isn't in every place. You know, it's about where do you settle. You know, even America was only 13 states before, and it extended all the way to, you know, to the other coast. Yeah. So it's like certain places, the only form or only time they see minorities is on screen. Because sometimes I don't like some of these questions in a way because it makes it seem like every white person's evil. I've had teammates, I've had roommates when I was in boarding school. It's not everyone, it's just that some people haven't been exposed to it. It's like I said with my coach, I think it's because being in Philadelphia, he was just he was exposed to it and he knew at a young age, like, oh, okay, this is what it is.
And that's the same thing with Muslim people.
Yeah.
Because people aren't around Muslims all the time. And I know it's a little bit off topic, but it's the same thing.
I don't think anyone here is saying that all white people are evil. I think we know that there are good white people in this world. Yeah. The fact of the matter is, a lot of the things that we are fighting against is the system of whiteness. I guess in a lot of ways, the residual effects of Jim Crow laws, slavery, and things like that. Those are the things we are trying to change. It's not African Americans' job to go out into rural areas of America and try to change, you know, the mentality of racist white people. That's not our job. When it comes to policy change and things like that, and African Americans progressing, you can be racist, you can be a Nazi, anti-Semite, whatever. As long as there are policies in place that'll make sure that your attitude cannot affect me, my family, or my children in any way, then by all means, you can keep those attitudes. But what we need to change is the systems of whiteness and racism and oppression. That's what matters most.
There you go.
Well, I think it's because it's a constant thing with Jarrell. She doesn't want to make the connection with Africans and African Americans. She wants to make an apparent line in the sand that they're just 100% different. But black people don't exist in America without coming from Africa. They just appear. They weren't just created once they got to America. So to say that they were never enslaved, this makes no sense. That's how they were transported from there to the Caribbean to America. It's the North American trade. The North America slave trade, it's a triangle that shows the pathways of boats. That's literally how they all came from there to here. America wasn't everyone that's American is a very loose term. No one's really American because everyone came from somewhere, whether it was Europe or Africa of the sort. So someone had to bring us here, and it was through slavery.